Dear friends of EWTN, I wish you a cordial welcome on behalf of the Cardinal Vicar, who is absent from Rome, whom I represent on this occasion as Bishop Delegate for Culture in the Diocese of Rome. The theme chosen for this round table, proclaiming the message of the Gospel in modern times, is also of extreme interest to the particular Church of Rome, of which the Pope is the Bishop. For years, the pontiffs have been reminding the priests and the faithful of this city that we are in time of a new evangelization. And in the light of this vision, the diocesan ecclesial dynamic has moved and is proceeding. If we go back from the teaching of St. Paul VI with the Evangelii Nuntiandi of 1975, passing through the Redemptoris Mission 1990 of St. John Paul II, we succeeded in completing the visual arc that leads to the magisterium of Pope Francis, with the apostolic exhortation Evangelii Gaudium, where the evangelizing Christian communities are the protagonists. This is how the credibility of the witness of faith of Christians on two main fronts is at stake. On one hand, the verification of the existence of a personal, profound experience of personal encounter with Christ on the part of every believer. The reason for the discovery of the full meaning of life and the desire for the communication of the experience made both with believers in Christ and with anyone who is in search of authentic answers to profound human questions. Why birth? Why life? Why death? On the other hand, in a complementary way, it is necessary to ascertain that the capacity of Christian communities at all levels to present the message of gospel in a credible way. We all work in this diocese to ensure the depth of faith in Christ on the part of every baptized person, and at the same time to make the ecclesial communities ever more present and close to the realities of neighborhoods, developing acceptance, solidarity, participation, and collaboration without discrimination. In this still today, we feel solicited by the title and content of a discourse of St. Paul VI at the closing of the Second Vatican Council. Trust in men and dialogue with the world. Thank you for this round table.
Thank you, Excellency. Thank you very much, Bishop Paolo Savadacci. Cardinal De Donatis wanted to be with us but on a short notice. He could not participate here for our Roman nights. So thank you even more for being with us and welcoming us here in this beautiful, beautiful place. Thank you, Excellency. We can give another round of applause that we made here. Thank you. That was the right cue. That was the right cue. My name is Andreas Tonhauser. I'm the Vatican Bureau Chief for EWTN based here in Rome. EWTN is a global Catholic network. We have media outlets. We have 11 TV stations. We are present in many countries around the world. We reach 380 million households around the world, not only through TV, but also radio and our online channels, even through print. And it's a great honor for us to be able to host this new format. It's the 4th edition of Roman Nights in various places here in Rome. And I must say, when I first saw also the Lateran Museum and saw those very historical halls, I was really astonished and very happy that we were able to host this event tonight here. That was also possible because of a close partnership with the Diocese of Rome, especially with the soon-to-take-place World Meeting of Families here in this city. It will be in June, which is organized as well by the Diocese of Rome, and we are the media partner for this event, transmitting, broadcasting live in 4 languages across the world, really, for this important thing. But tonight, we actually want to touch upon this issue, communicating the message of the gospel in modern times. And for that, I have a very esteemed panel that I would like to introduce to you now, here with me, here in the front. And first, allow me to start with Dr. Elizabeth Lev. She has been living in Rome for many, many years. She's decided to move to the Eternal City while getting her doctorate at the University of Bologna. She's the professor of art history of Duquesne. I should have learned to pronounce this right. Duquesne University's Italian campus. She also teaches at the Pontifical University of the Angelicum and the University of Mary. When she's not teaching, she can be found to guide tours around the city or writing books. Her latest book is titled The Silent Night, St. Joseph in Art. And in 2015, Dr. Lev gave a TED Talk on the Sistine Chapel, and that's important to point out, hence our topic tonight, on the Sistine Chapel that has reached 1.8 million views. And she's been collaborating with EWTN as well for many years. And thanks to EWTN, she was the first lay woman in history to speak on camera in the Sistine Chapel. She's joined tonight by Father Jose Maria Laporte. He's the professor of Foundations of Institutional Communication and of Church Doctrine on Communication at the Pontifical University of the Holy Cross, also known as Santa Croce. From 2011 to 2019, he was the dean of the School of Institutional Social Communication. He was also a member of the Dicastery for Communication of the Holy See from 2017 to 2021. He holds a doctorate of theology from Santa Croce and a doctorate in social communication from the University of Navarra in Spain. Michael Warsaw is Chief Executive Officer of EWTN, of our Global Catholic Network. Since 2009, he became also chairman of the board and joined EWTN 30 years ago, and has held senior management positions in the areas of television production, satellite operations, and technical services, working directly with Mother Angelica, the network's founder. In 2011, when the network acquired the National Catholic Register, he has become its publisher. And in 2014, Mr. Warsaw supervised the merging of Catholic News Agency and the ASI Group to EWTN. He oversees the network's strategic direction and mission around the world, and in 2017, Pope Francis appointed him as a consultor to the Vatican's Dicastery for Communications. Michael Warsaw is also my direct boss, so I would be very grateful to all of you if you could welcome not only him, but the whole panel with a very warm round of applause. That would be very kind. Thank you so much. And let me join you here now. And Michael, maybe I may start with you as well. You've seen church communication evolve throughout your extensive work in the media. And what does communicating the gospel look like in 2022? And what are the challenges that you find in your work?
Sure. Well, first of all, let me say you're doing a great job.
that must have been the warm-up.
So far. No, and also really it's just a pleasure for me to be here with you all, to be back in Rome. It's obviously a common story, but it's been a little over 2 years since I was last here, which for someone who traveled to Rome 5, 6 plus times a year often, that's been a very long period of time. So thank you for welcoming me and welcoming me back home, and it's great to be with my friends, Father and Dr. Lev, who've been friends for many, many years and collaborated in many ways. So thank you all. I think to your question, though, obviously the pandemic, a topic that we talk about constantly these days, really has in a way been a wonderful opportunity to show the breadth and the depth of Catholic media and the ability of the Church and Catholic entities to use media platforms to reach out and to reach people. One of the things that we saw, certainly from EWTN's perspective, was that when the world went into lockdown at the beginning of the pandemic and churches literally everywhere in the globe were closed, people began to turn to EWTN and to our platforms and to all of our television channels, our social media platforms, where we made a special emphasis on liturgy and devotions and things that would really support people in this moment of need. And so in a way, it seemed to me that the 40 years that led up to that moment of the 40 years of EWTN's existence really had been about, in a way, preparing for that moment and preparing a platform and a global platform that would enable us to respond to that in that moment. One of the things that we heard from people in all corners of the world was just how in this moment of despair, in this moment of loneliness and isolation, how coming to the EWTN platforms, whether they were watching television or listening to radio or watching a social media feed or a live stream, whatever way they joined us, they felt a connection to their fellow Catholics and people around the world. And so, in a way, it I think, helped to build a certain sense of community in a very dark hour, in a very uncertain hour, that really, I think, helped to give people hope in that time. So I think more than anything over these last couple of years, it showed the importance of media as being a way for the Church to continue to be community in order to continue to connect with people. Certainly, in another way, we see that in this present moment with our work in Ukraine. EWTN has a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week television channel in Ukrainian that's based in Kiev, and a team in Kiev. And so that team stayed there during the beginning of the war. They've remained there. That channel has continued to be on the air and has continued to be a source, I hope, of inspiration and refuge and hope for people there in such difficult circumstances. But again, the idea that communications media enable us in this moment, in this day and time, to be able to reach out to the peripheries with the gospel message, even in the most desperate of circumstances.
Maybe if I just may ask another question there as well. What kind of content did you find most helpful for your viewers, maybe even for you personally? EWTN is showing a wide array of content, but what was maybe the most?
Certainly, I think what we heard from our audience around the world, regardless of what culture or language or place, was really masses, of course, and the devotionals, the idea of being able to join together with people to pray the rosary. We also, during that time, initiated on one of our social media channels, a live transmission of Eucharistic adoration from the network's chapel in Alabama in the United States that had, millions and millions of views, because it allowed people who couldn't actually be present in a church with our Lord in the Eucharist to at least have that connection, knowing that there were others who at that moment were praying with them around the world. And that, I think, brought a great sense of peace and hope to people in that time.
Thank you. Liz, maybe from a different perspective, methods of sharing the gospel have transformed. Arts, even plays, proclamations, word of mouth. Today we have online channels, but in any case, art always played also an important role. What does it look like today?
Well, I think before we go to today, I'd like to drop back 1,800 years, because we're in the Eternal City. And I'd like to look for a moment when the Christians first emerged into this Roman Empire, this world of men becoming gods, and they needed to proclaim the gospel, and they wanted to use pictures because the Romans, the Gentiles, they were people who understood pictures. And so from the very beginning, from 200 years in, the Christians began to think about how to recount a story through these images. And so interestingly, when we look at the catacombs, we're sitting in the city with these amazing catacombs, the earliest expression of Christian art, and we see a short list of essential stories with reduced colors, no complex scenery, but just the essence of stories of joy, hope, healing, and redemption. And somehow that kernel, which was first planted in those underground catacombs, has grown and grown and grown. And we've seen all the beautiful manifestations. We have the Renaissance, we have the Baroque. And in a certain sense, today, I would say that what we need to recover, at least in art, is sending out that same message to a people who want to see signs of hope, to look at something that brings offers of redemption, that brings forth stories of hope, of how people can change, how people can transform, even if we do it in a sort of a more of a simple, reduced, easier to understand manner. And in many ways, I think this is where these platforms, whether it's television or a TED Talk, where we have to compress something we have to compress the story into the essential points that will get people's attention, draw them out, get them involved, lean in. There, I think there's a beautiful crossover with what the Christians were doing in the earliest years with what we're trying to do with media today to really bring people together, gather them around a great story.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Father, it's one thing to study, to reflect on and understand also theology and God's word, but it's a different story than how to communicate it to different audiences, to different people. You're working also with seminarians. Mm-hmm. What is important for somebody who is going to be a priest to learn about communication?
Well, I would say conviction, learning and painting, in the sense when I was coming here in a taxi, I was talking with the taxi driver, and he was telling me, Father, what do you think? In Italy, we used to have the oratories. I used to go to the church to play soccer, to do many things. And my feeling is that the youth now are missing this. And what he was saying is, there was something very interesting that I lived. I understood that was not very practicing now, right? But well, he was looking at that with a nice view and probably very close to the church. And he was thinking that that thing was important, and that was important also today. Then from my point of view, the first thing is that we need to have the conviction that when we talk about the faith, we are talking about the human being. In the sense, the image of God, the human being is image of God, the faith fits perfectly. And the same way that it will be it will be asking why it's important to talk about the human being, because it's important, it's clear. I think it's the same, why should we talk about the faith? Because one thing is related to the other. And I think conviction that what we have is something that is good not only for the past, but for the present. Listening, because I think that the youth now are saying a lot about their frustrations, about their now you can see also with the pandemics, also the way they are used to have so many things, but they are missing the affection, the friendships, so many things that they find in the church. And then I think in some ways painting, taking the example that she was saying, because we need to do I would say, a thinking work. We need to work on thinking and how to explain the faith. I would put you maybe 3 examples. One, someone who has become priest a few years ago was a little kid, no, he was the coach of our soccer team. And once he heard that he had to pray with the gospel, and he was in the chapel one day asking, well, how do you work with this? And he had the gospel in his hands. And he's a very normal, that now he's a priest. Or now in the flight a few days ago, coming to Rome, on my side was a girl, woman, 29 years old, just married, not practicing Catholic, that she had left her work in a makeup company, very nice and very, because she was thinking that they were not proposing the youth nice things. And we were talking also about the faith, and she was not practicing. And my feeling is that we need to rethink how, in some ways, to paint the faith and to communicate it again.
And maybe just quickly, so communicate the faith again. And we've also touched already on new media, social media. Of course, everybody's talking about this. But isn't that also like a distraction? I could imagine even in the seminary?
Well, yeah, what I realize is that for many seminarians, but for the youth in general, well, they have grown in a very, I would say, interlinked world. And I think the silence, interior silence, is very important. But I don't think it's very much different than in the past, in the sense, well, they have to learn to manage that in the way how to, I would say, giving priorities to their own life. And the same way that in the past, maybe they were invited to too many parties and they had to decide to where to go. Now, in some ways, social media is invitation to too many things, and you have to decide where to go. That's my feeling. And it's not that you shouldn't go to any party. You should decide what to do and how you are more, I would say, yourself in that condition. In the sense, there are some people who don't like Instagram and they prefer maybe to share their thoughts or in some ways. Other people who likes pictures. Other people who likes, I don't know, Instagram or Facebook or whatever.
Very well, thank you. Thank you, Father. Before I come to my next question, I just would like to remind also our audience here that it is possible to ask questions as well. So I've prepared a few, but then I would really need your help as well. If you have some questions to the panel on that topic, please do feel free to ask that. But before we come to that...
Let me just say, though, I think as a follow-up really to what Father
please.
was saying, I think most technologies are neither good nor bad. They're neutral, most. I think that's the case with technology platforms and communications as well. There is great potential in many of the newer platforms that have been developed over the last 10 to 15 years, whether it's Facebook's or Instagram, even TikTok, now. There's great potential in that, but there's also great peril in that as well. And I think that is the challenge that we have. And as we look to even further generations of technologies, I think something like the metaverse, for example, which I think is really potentially very, very disturbing, in the sense of bringing people into this sort of false world where they can pretend to be whoever they want and have whatever they want and exist in a way that's not real. And I think what people need is that real human connection and true community and true connections, to people. And I think how one uses and what choices one makes and how you use these platforms, really is critical. And how we as communicators, we as people who are telling stories and using these platforms, how we draw people to what we are doing and the content that we're creating, which is content for the good, not for the bad. I think that's a critical thing for us to continually be reflecting on in this time.
Maybe we can sort of also stay a little bit on this topic. How is EWTN, for example, using new media? Also accepting it, but EWTN is known for the TV, maybe radio as well. There's a print newspaper in the fold. What role does digital play?
Well, from the very beginning of EWTN in 1980, when Mother Angelica was inspired to create EWTN, she, at that time, embraced new technologies. She embraced what was then the cutting edge technology of satellite and cable television. And then throughout our history, we've always been a very early adopter of new technologies and new platforms. So in 1995, we were one of the first Catholic entities in the world to actually have a website and to have web content. By 1997, which is unheard of, we were streaming video online. Now it was, very jerky and very early, and the technology wasn't there, but we were doing those things early on because our mission is to use all platforms, all available means of technology to spread the gospel and to reach the world with the good news. So in more recent years, as new platforms have come on, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or whatever technologies there are, whatever platforms there are, we have a presence there, and we are certainly on the social media platforms, for example, reaching tens of millions of people every year through those platforms. We have certainly embraced on-demand architectures and streaming, and we're delivering, I think last year was something like 35 million hours of online streaming on-demand content, not the live stream. So enormous numbers of people who are coming to our platforms across the world who are using these newest cutting-edge, bleeding-edge technologies in order to access the content we have. And that's something that we continue. That's an active conversation among our teams across the world. As you know, we've had these conversations here about our presence in Rome and the Vatican. We always want to embrace those new technologies for the use of the church and the use of the gospel.
So it plays a significant role, also the new media, and to find the right
Absolutely.
way and the right...
Absolutely, and to balance that, I think you balance that against, sort of old media, the idea of the traditional linear television channels or the traditional linear radio and audio services which we provide and which are reaching millions of people as well, but you must be in that space.
Yeah.
And also the fact that not all the people follow all the media, because sometimes the problem is that we pretend that everybody follows all the platform, all the things, and I think part of the balance is the freedom to choose where I should be according to what I am. For example, in the case of a seminarian, it is clear that maybe, of course, the cultures in Nigeria, Australia, or Canada are different, but I think it's very important you have to link your communication with what you are. And it is clear that sometimes, I would say, a schoolboy, his life, waiting the bus for going to class is not the most emotional thing, and you are not able to put each day who knows what on your account of Instagram, or he learns or she learns to trying to find the right way to be herself or himself in a specific platform, or at the end, it will become a damage. That's what I...
Yes, yeah, no, I understand. Liz, one of the most streamed or most viewed pieces of content that we have on our social media is about the Vatican museums, a documentary produced actually by the people here also handling the cameras and being present here, which is very interesting to me because you would assume that something with so much history might not be appealing to younger audiences. But you also wrote a book, How Catholic Art Saved the Faith. Is that happening nowadays also in new media?
I think new media will need to address how to present art to young people. I think, but the fact that there is this intense interest in the Vatican museums, the incredible success of your documentary, but also just the physical lines. And I think one of the most beautiful things I saw in that reopening time of the pandemic, or after the pandemic, in the Vatican museums was the number of young people I started to see in the museums. I'm sort of used to seeing the tour groups off the cruise ships, sort of the silver heads going through the museums. But to see these young people looking and wondering. But these young people come to this work and they have the wonder. They experience the amazement of seeing whether it's the gallery of the maps or the Sistine Chapel ceiling or the Raphael rooms or the marvel that is St. Peter's, but to help them to understand more how these beautiful things are part of a story is really where I think it becomes more and more important that we find a way to insert the story and the meaning behind the beauty into the lives of young people. And again, trying to figure out how to do that via the social media platforms, while at the same time sort of resisting the constant temptation or the constant onslaught that comes from the secular world to kidnap, to hijack these works of art. So Michelangelo is really addressing a social issue that has nothing to do with his own time. Raphael is really something, bringing forth scandal, instead of really allowing these works to shine forth. And I think it is sort of, I feel personally that in my life as a teacher, as a guide, as an author, that it's my duty to bring forth and to make people see this beauty rests on truth. It rests on truth and it rests on goodness. And I see my fellow guide friends out here, and we are all united in this purpose. And the more that we can find a way to share this purpose that we do in a little way, one-on-one, and to give it a larger space in platforms or social media, I think is a key part of re-evangelizing, re-spreading the gospel, re-communicating the good news through art.
When preparing homilies, do you teach seminarians, Father, also to, I don't know, reference works of arts, for example?
Well, because since many of the people grown on our times are very used to images, especially in Rome, it's very easy to use the art to explain things to the people. And it's recommended for the homilies, but not only art, but also the stories. Because also the stories, in some ways, the gospel is the nicest story, you know, and the way to help people to see how that story becomes a story during the history, because so many people who have lived during centuries and taken that story in their personal lives. Then I think that art is in some ways the link between the origin and the real life, but painted, remained on the walls. Then to the seminarians, usually we try to take them to many of the museums and also relate them very much to I would say, to the history of the church, but also to the art in order to preach, because it helps. The images are something that are entering easily in the heart of the people and helping them to understand better the faith.
I think there's a parallel in the age that we live in and the age when this great art of the 16th and 17th century comes out. I mean, when the Protestant Reformation happens, it happens to coincide with this tremendous mass media invention, which is the printing press. And while it is fairly simple to write a catchy headline with a few little tendentious lines, it's very difficult to explain truth and to lock out points one by one. And I think when the Catholic Church found itself at times a little overwhelmed by these tremendous numbers of pamphlets and stories, often with catchy titles that today we would describe as clickbait, the idea of putting in images which allow one to more leisurely penetration into an idea, something that allows a little bit more give give and take between the viewer and the story. It was a very, very successful moment for the church to bring forth art. So in particular, artists like Caravaggio, who really shine in this period. And so there is really a great deal to be said, to be putting forth, whether for seminarians, young people, students, or just your viewers, that, you know, in the face of the noise of the media, of the titles and the lines and the distracting headlines, but to put in front of them an image that allows us to really enter into what we can see, what we can perceive, what we can't see with our eyes, but what we can understand with the eyes of faith. And art has traditionally been a magnificent window for that.
And I think that in a society as ours, with the society of the image, this approach will help you to go behind the image and maybe also connect with the interior silence. Because sometimes we go, no, too many images, too many inputs. Well, if we learn to select and to go beyond that image in this way, as the art does, maybe it could be a very good way also to present the faith or to go farther, or also to create interior spaces for the people, because you realize that sometimes the contemplation of the art, people need time for themselves, time for interior silence. And sometimes these multiple images and things doesn't help, but this behavior, I think, could help also to communicate the faith.
Thank you. Maybe at this point, I would like to open the conversation a little bit more also to our audience. Are there any questions?
Father Jose Enrique, Claretian missionary, and I was wondering, as a question here, Mr. Michael, no? As EWTN is a global network around all over the world, how do you confront this challenge of inculcating the message to all the different sensibilities, no? Because we know, no, Latin American church, North America, African. So how do you?
Sure. No, it's a great question. So, I remember in 1995 when we were beginning our first international television channel, which was actually our Latin American channel. I had at that time the opportunity to travel with Mother Angelica to Buenos Aires, and we were beginning that project, and I remember her setting out sort of her vision of what these international channels should be, and that was that they could not be channels that were simply an American export, that they had to be channels that reflected the faces, the voices, the cultures, and the spirituality of the people that we were intending to serve. And so that really, from the first moment that we began our expansion outside of the United States, that really was then our guiding principle and continues to be our guiding principle as we have expanded globally. So the majority of, probably 90% of the content that we air on our Latin American television network is produced within Latin America. We have now developed in later years regional television channels. So I mentioned Ukraine, or we have channels now in Hungary and Romania, Germany, in Poland, Norway, Sweden, the Netherlands, and many others that are in development or starting. In each of those instances, EWTN is assisting a core group in each of those countries that is really developing and creating the content for those channels. So again, they're following that original vision that they're not an American export, but these are truly channels that are created by the people that they are intended to serve. And so that's really been our guiding principle from the beginning of our international work.
Is that maybe, Liz, is that maybe easier for art also to sort of bridge different cultures, that it's easier to understand? I mean, we're sitting here in front of wonderful, beautiful works of art also. Is that something accessible or more easily accessible to cultures across the globe?
I think that's evidenced when we look at the the crowds of people or simply the fascination that people have with the fascination is particularly with art produced by the Christian church. And we see the Last Supper of Leonardo da Vinci, the Sistine Chapel by Michelangelo, the Pietà, the Upper Basilica in Assisi. This brings people, not only people for spiritual reasons, but people who come because of the beauty. And I will say, and I was thinking about this earlier when you were speaking, that to me one of the most beautiful, important things for us to remember about art is that when we are standing together in the Sistine Chapel, we're all standing, and I look around sometimes and I see faces from all over the world. I hear languages, many I don't recognize, and we're all gazing in the same direction. And one of the most beautiful things that art does, it stops us from the sort of the fixating on the sty in your eye or the thing I don't like about you, and it directs us. When art is made well, art directs us towards a common understanding of something that is beautiful, good, and true. And we find ourselves all being able to be in agreement as we gaze upon this thing together. It truly is a way of bringing people together, and it's evidenced every time you walk into a museum. I'm among the most guilty of when I see a whole bunch of people standing in front of the painting that I wanted. Today I was trying to look at the conversion or the calling of St. Matthew in San Luigi dei Francesi. This huge group of people. Oh my goodness! And then I said, wait a minute, this is wonderful. All of us looking together at a story of conversion. All of us sort of feeling this pull, looking towards that light of Christ. It's a wonderful and amazing thing that art can do.
Thank you. I can take one or two more questions. There are 5 now. Maybe we can collect 2 or 3 and make a final round.
So I'm a practical theologian who fell into working as a middle school RE teacher in a large school in Rome. And one of the tasks I had to do, I realized immediately with the students who don't usually link into any social media or anything to do with the church, was I had to immediately try to release their sacramental imagination. And one of the projects I set them was to try and find a way of using social media to set out the call for disciples in the world. And the projects and the responses that came back from the students was just unbelievable. We had clothes companies with messages from God and quotes from the Bible, and Jesus became a football manager and all sorts of things. And as I was teaching the children, it reminded me that Jesus reaches out into the everyday and into the every moment. And I'm wondering, how could EWTN assist we poor, overworked middle school religion teachers to release that sacramental imagination?
Maybe we can take 2 more questions.
So this was. Do you want me to respond to that first, or do you want me to?
If it's possible that we then respond
Okay,
to all
fine.
questions at once. Yeah.
Well, I'm fascinated by this topic, and especially Pieper speaks about images and art being necessary for our souls to rise spontaneously to God and contemplate. So I was wondering how EWTN uses the changing nature of technology, especially the rapidity, to express sort of what Dr. Lev and Father were speaking about, getting to the depth behind the images and the art that are expressed. So how to combine that depth that's there, but also the rapidity of technology.
Maybe a last one. Here in the front.
Hello, my name is Juan de la Torre from La Machi Communication for Good Causes. And my question is, I'm Argentinian, living in Barcelona, between Barcelona and Rome. And here, when you think what is Christian, that's Catholic, right? But you came from a country that where that's not happening, right? And how can you measure the impact of the Catholic Church related to art in a non Catholic country.
Thank you very much. I think that was, Michael, for you, how to support teachers and getting
But
yes, that was my idea as well.
So, yeah, I think one of the things that we have tried to do through the years is to be very conscious of the need for media and the need for materials or content that really is helpful in teaching the faith at all levels. You know, not certainly to children, to young adults, but to senior citizens as well. So we really have always tried in our content development work to really have content across all ranges. So we have produced a lot of content that's available on our online platforms for younger people, things that are certainly very catechetical in nature, but also really that tell stories, that tell good stories. I mean, at the end of the day, it's all about the storytelling. It's all about the content. It's not really about how I get a signal or how I get a feed. It's about the content and the story that's told. So one of the things that we are trying to do is to recommit ourselves to being the best storytellers that we can be. Because we have the best story, we know that. But how do we tell the stories of the saints, of the gospel, of our Lord, of the church? How do we tell these in a very interesting, compelling way that is beautiful and done well, but that conveys those essential truths? And so that's something we're continuing to work on, and that we have available via our digital platforms and so many ways. So it's something that is very important to us, and I hope we're doing it right. I hope we're doing it well, and I know that we're committed to always doing it better. So,
if I may, no, I can't tell you what EWTN can do for you, but
sure, go ahead.
But I do think your question really does bring up a very, very interesting point. Every conversation we're having tonight is about a dependence on sight, on visual imagery. We want to see things, we want to hear things. This is very much a discussion about a dependence on our empirical senses, what I hear, what I see, what I touch. When you talk about sacramental imagination, this is a question of teaching or showing young people, particularly at that critical age, how to look beyond the material and be able to see something that is greater. And I think one of the more interesting things to really take them in a direction is how do you make present, how would they make present something that cannot be perceived immediately on a television screen or on the radio, it can be, but is nonetheless true. And that truly has been what the Catholic Church brought, Catholic Christians brought to art, a sense of looking beyond, that even though we're dependent on these physical senses of ours, and we're using art and we're using television, but the idea was to always point through and point beyond. And I think that's a really beautiful role that you have to help children while their imaginations have not yet been jaded and closed and chained up and dependent on, well, did you see a documentary on that? You have this wonderful role of being able to allow them to see and imagine in the way that Christ said when he said, "Let the little children come to me."
Well, and maybe there is here an idea of a program, because maybe the students of a school of art, maybe it could be interesting to involve in a program some of the maybe art professors of secondary school talking or helping or maybe making their students part of the program. No, in the sense, who knows, maybe in the future it would be a nice idea with students from all over the world, young people. But I wanted just to remark the fact that I think that by one side we need to take the people beyond, but at the same time going back to reality, in the sense what the faith means for me now. Because when the people go looking in Instagram for friends, in the sense they are looking really for deep friendship. They are finding maybe just multiple contacts, but they are looking for friendship. And then for us is part of this way, someone was asking about this, taking them beyond, but at the same time, that beyond linking to reality. What does it mean, faith for me, or what does it mean, that sacramental thing that she was talking about in my real life? And that's part of our work, I would say.
Finding the balance, again, if I can summarize this, I am afraid that we're almost at the end of our conversation. It was not the goal to find final answers or to have a complete overview now on the topic, but more to give an inspiration to also join in the conversation, especially afterwards, where we prepared a small drinks reception where we can still stand together, continue the conversation, getting to know each other also better. I would like to thank our panel here. Thank you for your time in a very busy period, as I find, especially here in the Eternal City. Thank you all for coming, for being with us today. And you will be able to relive the moments that you had here, the experiences that you had here on our social media channels and on TV as well. Please just go to ewtn.com. You'll find your way there. Thank you very much, Father. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Michael, for joining us. And please, if I could ask you one last time for that very warm, welcoming applause that you had in the beginning for our panel here, I would be very grateful.
Thank you.